Sarah stepped closer. Her voice broke with emotion. "You're the one, the medic. Daddy talked about you constantly. He said you carried him 2 miles to safety. He said you went back for the others even when the shooting hadn't stopped." David felt something crack inside his chest. Paul had looked for him, had worried about him, had carried the weight of that day just like David had. "I needed to disappear for a while." Sarah reached for his hands. Wedding guests were openly staring now, but she didn't seem to care. "He's gone, isn't he? That's why you didn't want to be found. Welcome to One Human, One Story. Before we begin this story, could there be a veteran photographer at your events too? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button." David Chen had been a wedding photographer for 15 years. Every Saturday from spring through fall, he captured love stories, nervous grooms, teary mothers' first dances, and stolen kisses. His camera saw it all, but David himself preferred to remain invisible. He worked alone. No assistants, no second shooters, just him and his equipment. 2 cameras, 3 lenses, and the kind of quiet professionalism that made brides recommend him to their friends. David captured moments without becoming part of them. His style was documentary, natural, light, candid emotions, real moments rather than posed perfection. Couples hired him because his photos told stories. What they didn't know was that David understood stories better than most, because he carried one he never told. At 45, David lived simply. A small apartment in Portland, Oregon, filled with photography equipment and very little else. No family photos on his walls, despite taking thousands for other families. No wedding pictures of his own, because there had never been a wedding. His routine was predictable. Edit photos during the week, scout locations when needed, shoot weddings on weekends. Quiet, reliable, invisible. The way he preferred it after years of being anything but invisible. That June morning started like hundreds before. The Riverside Gardens venue was elegant, a historic mansion overlooking the Willamette River with gardens perfect for outdoor ceremonies. David arrived early as always to check lighting and plan his shots. The wedding was large, 200 guests, elaborate decorations, a full military honor guard for the groom. Captain Michael Harrison, Army Rangers, marrying his college sweetheart Sarah Mitchell. Standard military wedding, except the bride had specifically requested that the photographer capture every detail. Sarah had said something strange during their consultation. She wanted photos of not just the ceremony, but every person who attended, especially older guests. She said she wanted to remember everyone who came to honor her father's memory. David had learned not to ask too many questions about family dynamics. Weddings brought out complicated emotions. His job was to document whatever story unfolded, not to understand all the backstory. The morning preparations went smoothly. David photographed Sarah getting ready with her bridesmaids, hair, makeup, the dress, all the traditional shots. But he noticed something different about this bride. Sarah kept looking at an old photograph on her vanity, a military unit photo from what looked like the 1990s. She would touch it gently, then look away as if it was too painful to study for long. When David asked about the photo, Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "My father, he was killed in Afghanistan in 2003. This is the last photo of his unit before that deployment. I keep it close because I want him to be part of today somehow." David nodded sympathetically and continued shooting. He had photographed many military families. Loss was often woven into their celebrations. He knew to be respectful and keep working. The ceremony was beautiful. Captain Harrison stood at attention as Sarah walked down the aisle. The honor guard presented arms. Guests wiped away tears as vows were exchanged. David captured it all with the practiced eye of someone who had documented hundreds of love stories. During the reception, David moved through the crowd, photographing toasts, dancing candid conversations. He was editing shots on his camera when he felt someone watching him. A middle-aged woman approached, military bearing, graying hair, kind eyes. She studied David's face intently. "Excuse me, you look very familiar. Have we met before?" David looked up from his camera. He didn't recognize her, but something about her gaze made him uncomfortable, like she was trying to place him in a memory he didn't want to revisit. "I don't think so, ma'am. I'm just the photographer." The woman continued staring. "What's your last name?" "Chen. David Chen." Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, David Chen from Seattle. You served with the 2nd Battalion." David's blood went cold. No one at his weddings knew about his military service. Ever. He had spent 15 years building a life where that part of his past stayed buried. I think you have me confused with someone else. But the woman wasn't backing down. You were a medic. Afghanistan, 2003. You saved my brother's life. David's camera suddenly felt impossibly heavy in his hands. The reception noise faded into background static. He looked around desperately for an exit, but they were surrounded by celebrating guests. Ma'am, I really think you're mistaken. The woman pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. The same unit picture Sarah had been clutching that morning. In it, a young David Chen in military fatigues knelt beside other soldiers. This is you. Sergeant Mitchell talked about you constantly after he came home. Said you pulled him out of an ambush. Said you saved 8 men that day, including him. David stared at the photo. 22 years old in full combat gear, kneeling next to Sergeant Paul Mitchell. The same Paul Mitchell whose daughter was getting married 50 feet away. That was a long time ago, David said quietly. The woman's voice broke. Paul died 2 years later. Different deployment. But he never stopped talking about the medic who refused to leave anyone behind. He said your name so many times, we all felt like we knew you. David's hands were shaking now. He had to get out of this conversation. Had to get back to being invisible. I should get back to work. Excuse me. But as he turned away, the woman called out, Sarah, Sarah, come here. I want you to meet someone. David watched in horror as the bride approached, still in her wedding dress, radiant with happiness, completely unaware that her day was about to change forever. Sarah, this is David Chen, the photographer you hired. He's also the medic who saved your father's life in Afghanistan. Sarah stopped walking. The smile disappeared from her face. She looked at David, then at the photo on the woman's phone, then back at David. What did you say? David felt the weight of 200 guests around him, the noise of the reception, the impossibility of escape. 15 years of carefully constructed invisibility crumbling in a single moment. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. You knew my father. David looked into her eyes and saw Paul Mitchell staring back at him, the same determined gaze, the same stubborn refusal to back down from difficult truths. Yes, I knew him. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled over her makeup. For a moment, she couldn't speak. You're the one, the medic. Daddy talked about you constantly. He said you carried him 2 miles to safety. He said you went back for the others even when the shooting hadn't stopped. David nodded slowly. He could feel the attention of nearby guests shifting toward them. This was exactly what he had spent 15 years trying to avoid. Your father was a good soldier, Sarah. A good man. Sarah stepped closer. Her voice broke with emotion. He said you disappeared after discharge. Said he tried to find you to thank you properly, but you had vanished. He worried about you. Said good soldiers sometimes had the hardest time coming home. David felt something crack inside his chest. Paul had looked for him, had worried about him, had carried the weight of that day, just like David had. I needed to disappear for a while. Sarah reached for his hands. Wedding guests were openly staring now, but she didn't seem to care. He's gone, isn't he? That's why you didn't want to be found. David nodded. Different deployment, 2005, IED. Sarah closed her eyes. When she opened them, her tears had stopped, but her grip on David's hands tightened. He saved my life too, you know. Not in Afghanistan. Here at home. After Mom died, he was everything to me, and he was only able to be my father because you brought him home that first time. David looked around the reception. The bride's emotional conversation with the photographer had drawn attention. Guests were watching with curiosity and concern. Sarah, this is your wedding day. You should be celebrating with your husband. Sarah shook her head. This is exactly where I need to be. Daddy always said that if he ever found you, he would thank you properly. Since he can't, I'm going to do it for him. Before David could protest, Sarah turned to the crowd and raised her voice. Everyone, please. I want you to meet someone special. The reception gradually quieted. Captain Harrison joined his bride, looking confused but supportive. The DJ lowered the music. This is David Chen. He's our photographer today, but he's also much more than that. 15 years ago in Afghanistan, he saved my father's life. Daddy spent years looking for him to say thank you. Since Daddy can't be here to do it himself, I want all of you to help me thank the man who made sure I got to have a father. The crowd erupted in applause. Military guests stood at attention. Others wiped away tears. David stood frozen in the center of it all, wanting to disappear but unable to move. Captain Harrison stepped forward and extended his hand. Sir, On behalf of my wife's family and everyone here, thank you for your service, and thank you for bringing Paul home." David shook the young captain's hand. Around them, the applause continued. He felt exposed, vulnerable, everything he had tried to avoid for 15 years. But he also felt something else, something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. He felt seen, not as the invisible photographer, but as the person he used to be, the medic who refused to leave anyone behind. Sarah hugged him tightly. "Will you stay for the rest of the reception as our guest, not our photographer?" David looked at his camera, his equipment, his exit strategy. Then he looked at Sarah's face, her father's eyes staring back at him with hope and determination. "I'll stay." The reception continued, but everything was different. David found himself talking to guests, sharing stories. For the first time in 15 years, he wasn't hiding behind his camera. An elderly veteran approached him during dinner. "Thank you, son. Not just for what you did over there, but for what you're doing now. Paul's girl needed to meet you. She needed to close that circle." As the evening wound down, David realized something had shifted. The weight he had carried for 15 years felt lighter. Not gone, but more manageable, shared. Sarah found him as guests were leaving. "David, I want you to have something." She handed him the unit photo from her vanity, the same one he had been avoiding looking at all day. "Daddy would want you to have this." He kept it on his desk until the day he died. He said it reminded him that good men take care of each other. David took the photo. For the first time in 15 years, he looked directly at his younger self, the medic who had carried wounded soldiers to safety, the man he had tried to forget. "Thank you, Sarah." She kissed his cheek. "Thank you for giving me my father, and thank you for being here today. I think Daddy would be happy knowing we finally found you." As David drove home that night, the unit photo sat on his passenger seat. When he arrived at his apartment, he didn't hide it in a drawer or box. For the first time since his discharge, he placed a photo of his military service where he could see it every day. On his desk, next to his wedding photography award, two parts of his life that had never intersected until a bride recognized the man behind the camera. The next week, David received an email from Sarah. She and Captain Harrison wanted to hire him for their first anniversary photos. She said it would mean everything to have him document their first year of marriage, just like he had documented their wedding day. David wrote back immediately he would be honored. For the first time in 15 years, David Chen was no longer invisible, and he discovered that being seen wasn't as frightening as he had always believed. Now I ask you, have you ever discovered that someone in your life had a hidden story that changed how you saw them? Someone whose past connected to your own in ways you never imagined. Share their story in the comment. One human, one story, because sometimes the person documenting your most important moments is carrying the most important story of all. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is to see them for who they really are. Subscribe if stories like these matter to you, because every wedding photographer, janitor, teacher, or barista might be someone who once changed the world in ways they never talk about. Until next time, remember, the person behind the camera might be the one whose story most needs to be told.